want to introduce our speaker this morning from Creo, David Kauffman. David Kauffman is a principal engineer at Creo. We're very lucky to have Creo in our backyard. They're a huge BC success story. They employ over 4,000 people. They're in offices in 30 countries around the world. They choose Vancouver or British Columbia as their corporate head office. Creo has a pretty extensive product line, which surprised me. They manufacture over 300 products, ranging from digital cameras to information workflow systems, and they're really good part of British Columbia economy. David joined Creo in 1993. He's had a really successful career since starting there. He's been the driver of a number of successful initiatives at Creo. He introduced the Macintosh platform early on in his career there. He was the main architect behind PlateMaster, as well as he was a product manager for Burnaby. So he's been involved and driven some pretty successful initiatives at Creo. Thank him for volunteering his time this morning to come on and talk with us. Before Creo, I should add that he was at Vertigo. He also spent time at Mobile Data and at Kinetec. So please join me in welcoming David Kauffman. David?
Okay. Thanks, Rob, and good morning. Happy Valentine's Day. Creo means I create, and it means I believe. These two attributes describe both the internal attitude that crafted a unique Vancouver company, as well as one that's translated directly into customer value and what's become an amazingly loyal install base. This morning, I'd like to tell you the Creo story. After being there for almost 8 years, I've seen 2 CEOs, 3 logos, and about 4 stages of growth. And each has their own story. Each one has taught its own lessons. And some of the next stage of Creo's future looks to me as exciting as some of our early ones. And I hope you find something instructive in these next few minutes, and or at least entertaining in the telling. First, let me tell you about Creo today. Rob kind of summarized it. We're an international company. Our base is in Burnaby. That's where we started. I'm a UVC engineer, and that all started in the Discovery building in Discovery Park, just next to BCIT, and with 30 offices around the world. Our last year's revenue was just over $1 billion Canadian, and as we've grown, the software product line has complemented the hardware product line, so that we now have about 300 products in the graphic arts industry. So these include scanners, desktop scanners, digital camera backs that hook onto the back of a Mamiya or kind of Hasselblad class machine that's under the brand of Leaf. We have Iris inkjet proofers, a completely different technology than your standard desktop proofer, but a very high quality inkjet technology. Thermal imaging devices for films and plates, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. And software for creative and workflow management. Now, we also supply on-press imaging technology, that is lasers that actually bolt onto printing presses that expose directly onto printing presses as they print, as well as components for digital presses, which are zero graphic and other kinds of technologies that are coming to the market now for instant printing and high quality non-offset, as well as color servers for print on demand and other digital printers. Creo's customers are printing companies by and large, and they produce brochures, annual reports, magazines, books, and catalogs, as well as newspapers and packaging material. And many of the newsstands you see today at Chapters, at 7-Eleven, including some I'll show you right now, are printed on Creo equipment. For example, here's the February issue of Wired magazine. This is printed by our customer Quad Graphics in Saratoga, New York, approximately 500,000 run. And if one of the things I always like to look at is the second last page of Wired magazine has something you don't see very much in magazines, which is a colophon, the actual production notes on it, and you can get all kinds of gory detail about what the software that people work on and what music they're listening to while they make Wired magazine, which is also pretty interesting. And at the bottom here it says all kinds of things about composed digital proofs are submitted and imposed using a Creo thermal plate setter 3244. And I'll tell you, the first time we saw Wired magazine come up with that being printed on Creo equipment, it was pretty proud. another magazine that is a real showpiece for us is Vanity Fair. This magazine, among some of the others, really stand out on the magazine shelf. And that's partially because the printing technique that's used for Vanity Fair is a completely new kind of screening. There's only 4 colors of ink that go on a printing press, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And so there's only so many ways to mix them. And traditionally, the technology is something called half-toning, which produces those rosettes, those little kind of circles that you see that are most visible in newspapers. Creo's thermal technology, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes, has made it possible to have covers like this that are printed without rosettes, and that gives you something that really resembles photographic quality. And there's an example here on the spread that you can look at after that compares the Creo technology with stochastic screening compared to the traditional one. And you can see when you can see it up close, there's tremendous difference in the vibrancy and color. And this is something that's actually revolutionizing. It's changing the way printing is being done, especially for these high-end magazines, and that's all coming from technology developed here in Vancouver. So we're pretty excited about that. So where do we start? Well, Creo began in 1983, founded by Dan Gelbart and Ken Spencer. Dan brought a wealth of Vancouver-based experience in technical innovation. He created the high-resolution film recorders that McDonnell Detweiler sells. That's allowed JPL to image pictures of space flights and Venus and Mars. A lot of those things you see have been imaged on film recorders that Dan invented for MDA. And many of the satellite posters you see of the Lower Mainland have also been imaged through that technology. He calculated that using Shannon's communication theory, which is a theory of data transfer, that Mobile Data International could quadruple their rate of data sent over radio links by introducing digital error correcting codes on the radio. And that enabled really the first generation of car terminals for police cars and taxis. Again, a technology that was really pioneered here in Vancouver. And later he then co-founded Creo in order to build an optical tape recorder. That's a tape recorder that can hold 1,000 gigabytes on a single reel of kind of film. Now, while Dan brought the technology to Creo, Ken brought an organizational philosophy, one that was so novel and so profound that years later, many organizations have tried to implement it, but found that it's impossible without really rebuilding the entire company from the ground up. Ken's a student of organizational structure and of human behavior, and set out some key principles that founded Creo. One was, if you treat people like children, we will act like children. The corollary, if you treat people like adults, we generally live up to the expectation of acting like adults. Third was that people will align their personal goals with the company goals if there are incentives where both win, such as profit sharing or share options. And at the time that Creo started, offering share options to all the employees was considered very novel, and now it's pretty well standard in high-tech industries. And the fourth was that people should be reviewed in their performance reviews by the people they work with, not just the people they work for. Now, when you start a company this way, you create a principle-centered operation rather than a process-centered operation. So instead of having a big, thick policy and procedures manual that lays out every step that individuals have to follow in order to do their job, a principle-based company gives a lot of latitude to the individuals and, with it, more responsibility. So individuals at the edge of the organization make buying decisions and other decisions without a big hierarchical decision escalation procedure. And the payback for this is absolutely huge. Individuals feel empowered and trusted, and you also save the corporate overhead of having layers and layers of decision approval processes, most of which only add to your overhead cost, and most of which are only there in order on the assumption that people will actually try to cheat. So when people first interviewed for jobs at Creo, they were presented with this work model, and they said, well, you guys must be going broke, people must be spending out the door. But in fact, it does sound like a recipe for spending free fall, but in reality it makes for actually a very frugal environment. So as Rob mentioned, I recall ordering the first couple Macintoshes into Creo, running Quark Express, because that's the application that makes these magazines. So I really agonized over that purchase order. And for the first time really for the first time, I actually owned the buying decision. It was my decision to make. It was my ROI to calculate. It was my name on the purchase order. So instead of having to just convince my manager the way I did at previous companies, I had to completely own the buying decision. And when Ken turned up in my office a few days later to say, what the heck are those doing here? I had the return on investment understanding, the cost of the alternatives, the payback period, and all that in hand, and could justify why that was a good purchase for us to make. So distributed decision making allows us to respond quickly to customers and to competitive threats. But it's just one of the three pillars that Creo uses to stabilize our corporate growth. The other two that we use are economic thinking and peer review, which is, as I mentioned, tied to the allocation of shares. Now, economic thinking is the process that we use to make economically sound decisions. Amos Michelson, who's Creo's CEO, instructed more than 600 employees last year on really what's the basics of microeconomics. Ideas ranging from establishing the demand curve for a product to trying to capture the consumer surplus by discriminating your price points. So discussing things in purely economic ways has several benefits. First, it really reduces the amount of emotions and opinions from the discussion. It makes each person really put their cards on the table with some objective values to be discussed. And does it work? I'd say yes. Overall, it ensures that we look at return on investment when we're weighing the value of a decision. Not to say that the other ones don't come in, strategy or competitive threats or gut feel, but in the end, you try to quantify that in ways that take it out from being discussions of opinion into being one of economics. And I'll tell you, it's certainly impressive to be in meetings, hearing everyone from designers to service techs have heated arguments about the calculated net present value of one decision path versus the other. And finally, the third piece, the mortar that kind of glues all this cultural together is peer review. Because the annual review process contributes to the allocation of each employee's bonus share options. And this tie-in makes it clear that helping your coworkers, not screwing them, and taking action that directly influences the top line or bottom line of the company directly put money into your pocket. Peer reviews also motivate people to remain visible on their projects and to be working on projects that have clear payback to their teams and are valued by the company. So this is our way of kind of acting locally but thinking globally. And the teams at Creo recognize that their goal is to contribute to the company's overall success, and the peer review process helps reward that behavior. So these three cornerstones of Creo's culture, distributed decision-making, economic thinking, and peer review, helped fuel the rapid growth. Trusting employees and giving them responsibility for local decision-making without a large overhead of people second-guessing them, and encouraging support for the culture with strong feedback by peer review and what I'm told by some of the some of the hiring people in Vancouver as what's known as a very harsh interview process. People often go through 3 interview processes, interviewing from 6 to 18 times at Creo. But all this culture is only a groundwork, the soil, if you will. The soil can be as full of nutrients as you want, but nothing will grow in a rich soil without some seeds. And in Creo's case, the seeds that germinated this billion-dollar company came from an innovation and from a powerful core technology. In this case, very high-speed infrared laser imaging, developed by Dan Gelbart. Now, Creo's first product in the 1980s was an optical tape recorder, which we call the OTR. It was capable of storing vast amounts of data. Now, in the mid-80s, it looked like magnetic media, discs and tapes, were going to approach some kind of limits. And Dan Gelbart's experience with optical mechanical systems and optical electronic systems suggested that because optical wavelengths are so much smaller than material of magnetic media, that eventually optical storage would replace magnetic storage, which in the 80s was quite a leap. But certainly the adoption of CDs over cassettes and CD-ROMs over other magnetic storage has borne that out. Optical is fundamentally the better physics for storing things long term. Now, Creo's optical tape recorder was capable of storing 1 terabyte. That's 1,000 gigabytes on a reel of golden foil tape. It was beautiful. I was trying to find a sample of it, but we couldn't find it. But it's like when you look at the CD it's a piece of gold foil stamped between two pieces of plastic. And the optical tape recorder was basically a reel of that tape that wound through a tape recorder. Now, the first few of these devices were sold to the Canadian Centre for Remote Sensing, where they were used for capturing the streams of data that come from Landsat satellites continuously 24 hours a day. But the wider market for high-volume, long-term, write-once storage was large government organizations, most of whom are in the United States and most of whom have three-letter acronyms. And they were very reluctant to buy technology from a small Canadian company. So Creo sold that technology to EMAS, the US storage company, and sometimes I hesitate to think about what's being stored on those tapes today. So while development of the OTR continued, like many small companies, Creo hit a cash flow issue. So one strategy was to diversify into an area that both Dan and Amos had experience in, which was graphic arts. So Creo developed an imaging engine, and these are large drums that expose film. You wrap the film around the drum, and a laser tracks back and forth, exposing the film, kind of like a laser printer, but for high resolution for film. And we supplied those engines to other manufacturers who marketed them under their own name and logo. In 1992, R.R. Donnelley, who was then the largest printer in the United States, about a $4 billion company, began searching for a computer-to-plate device that they could put actually in the press room, so they could make plates directly digitally without any film at all. They asked one of their suppliers, a Japanese company called Dyneppon Screen, who told them they didn't actually make the engine that was inside their image setters, that a small company in Canada made them. So Donnelley said, okay. And they went to another one of their suppliers, a company called Optical, and asked them if they would make them a computer plate machine, and they also replied that actually they don't make the inside of the engine, it's made by a small company in Canada. So that began a chain of events that really has led to Creo's rapid growth as an innovator in graphic arts, and allowed us to fuel the kind of growth that's made us move from a 100-person company to a 4,000-person company. It always takes a lucky break. It's a combination of good timing, skill, and a bit of luck. Now, around the time that Creo was developing the computer-to-plate imaging hardware, I was brought into the company to develop the software to drive it. We soon realized that what we were involved in was not just about adding a new piece of hardware to printing plants, but that we were a catalyst for the complete digitization of the printing and prepress industry. And at that time, the desktop publishing revolution really ended at the laser printer. Even though desktop publishing enabled thousands of printers to print newsletters and stuff on their laser printers, to actually print them on an offset press meant many hours of taking pieces of film and laying it out on a light table, a piece of film like this, and then laboriously taping them together using magnifying glass to align them, because they have to be aligned to within a few thousandths of an inch, and putting them together onto bigger plates, onto bigger pieces of film, and then taking that big piece of film and putting it on top of a printing plate and exposing it to ultraviolet light for a few minutes, and then developing it, and it was quite a process. So going computer to plate meant completely eliminating film from their work, and a large number of processes in the plant that were tied to the physical handling of film itself. The film itself played the role of process control, of load balancing, performance measuring, scheduling, and estimating. It's the difference between looking at a stack of stuff in your inbox and going digital, where everything is now on your computer. So to badly paraphrase McLuhan on this, the medium was the workflow in the printing plants. So with the abandon that's characteristic of young technology companies, we bit off a chunk of the digital workflow in printing plants. And by and large, we've been successful in getting printers to completely overhaul their entire production process to take advantage of digital prepress. What we've learned is that you have to dig deeper below what customers tell you what their problems are. We've learned to watch and to listen and to analyze where time is being spent in those plants and where money is lost. And the economic thinking I talked about earlier means that discovering these opportunities to save time, calculating the value that brings to the customer, and then we apply sufficient technology to solve that problem, and finally share that savings between our customers and ourselves. In the printing plant, for example, we looked at the press make-ready time. Make-ready is the time that the press isn't actually printing anything. but it's the downtime between changing it from one job to another. So we calculated how long it would take to pay back a printer's investment in Creo equipment by calculating the time it would save in make-ready. And we demonstrated this to our customers because they wouldn't buy it without demonstrations, and then we priced our equipment at some fraction of that savings. For example, if a printing press, which is a several $million acquisition, given depreciation, labor, overhead, and all these other things, let's say it costs $600 an hour for a company like Metropolitan to have a printing press there. If our equipment can save a half hour of make-ready time, and that happens 8 times a day, and roughly 200 days a year, then that's a saving of $480,000. And that's exactly what the salesperson can use to justify a piece of equipment that costs substantially less than that in order to save that. And that gives them a clear payback to Creo for buying Creo equipment. So that's what we've been doing over the last 8 years is really changing the way printing and publishing is being done. And it's pretty exciting to see Creo's name and Creo's technology appearing in international publications and getting awards. But the printing industry itself, as in kind of an old media group, is not growing at the rate that Creo wants to grow in order to keep our investors happy and to fuel the kind of growth that we want to do of continuing to be a leading technology supplier and technology hiring company and innovator in the Lower Mainland. So we're taking the things we've learned from digital prepress and we're starting to apply them in other areas of electronic media. So when we introduced our computer-to-plate workflow, the biggest problem our customers faced was dealing with the complexity of computer storage. Now, in the physical world, we use all kinds of mnemonics to track things. We have file folders and manila folders and filing systems, and a lot of us use things like, the position of on my desk tells me a lot about what's important, so that I'm not disorganized, I'm only disorderly. There's a big difference between the two. But keeping track of where things are on the computers was really the biggest barrier to efficient workflow in the printing plants, and that reduced our customers' ability to run their Creo equipment at full utilization. And when you're buying a big piece of capital equipment, as you know from online or any other piece that you buy in your business, keeping it high utilization is how you get that payback. And anything that blocks, if that's on the critical path that keeps you from having your stuff online, then that's a roadblock that you have to remove. So the software solutions we came up kind of lumped themselves into an area of helping manage the glut of digital data, all sitting on hard drives on people's computer. And we did it by establishing a context for people to work in for each job. We call that concept a job context. Now it turns out, of course, that it's not just pre-press professionals who are having trouble keeping track of where things are on their computers. Creative professionals in video, on the web, all over face this problem every day, and for the same reasons. Digital is right there, overtaking a lot of our traditional tools, everything from airbrushes to video editing suites, and the management of computer files is a huge time-consuming activity. Now the problem of tracking files on your computer pales with the even bigger problem of email. Email is totally out of control. Over 1 billion emails are sent every day. Most of them pass my desk, I think. And we all use email for everything. We use it for dialogues, discussions, arguments, gossip, and we also use it for work. But email is mainly how we track projects that are scattered, multi-person projects. So what is the #1 project management software? I wouldn't say that it's a project management software at all. It's email. And it's file attachments that you use in order to send back and forth to your customers, your clients, your team members, more and more of whom work in locations as diverse as Whistler and Washington. Now the Gartner Group says that knowledge workers are spending an average of 49 minutes per day managing our email. That's not reading it, replying it, and deleting it. That's just managing it and moving it around. And because we know about the pain of managing files and email, instead of being able to work on creative projects, we developed some new software to help that. We took a lot of what we learned in digital prepress and we're bringing that to the desktop. The idea for this product is based on the theory of 6 degrees of separation, that people are connected to each other by a network of who knows who. We think that everything on your computer is also related to everything else on your computer. Well, it has to be because it's your computer. But now that disks hold hundreds of gigabytes, it's really time for software to take over the job of keeping those connections, the context of how things are related to each other. Right now, up to now, you've had to do that in your head. The other thing we found is that computers only help you find your files if you know the name or if you remember where you stored it. And I have enough trouble remembering the names of people I met this morning, let alone the files I created last week. And trying to recall the directory I saved them in seems to me pretty much like Russian roulette. Sometimes they go in the Documents folder, sometimes they go in the Applications folder, sometimes they go in Desktop. When I hit File Save, I'm not sure where those files go. It's worse than losing your keys. And now, the funny thing about file systems is that they were designed in the 1950s by computer scientists, of course, and they have an underlying structure of something called a hierarchical file system, developed because a multi-way tree is kind of one of the basic data structures of computer scientists, so that every educated computer science grad knows how to navigate the hierarchical file tree of the computer. But amazingly, this model hasn't changed in 50 years. And just as amazingly, most of the people that I do tech support for, like my dad, have no idea that you can have nested folders inside folders and what a hierarchical file system is. So having to retrieve files by their name or their location is not helping mortals organize their computer environments. We're humans. We work by association and by context. So I may not remember the name of the file, but I usually remember who sent it to me and what projects it's related to. So we developed a product that we call 6 Degrees software, and there's some information about it on the corner of the table, that makes connections between messages and file and people automatically as you work, as you send and receive email. We call it time-freeing technology for the creative mind, and you can find more about it at our website, creo.com/6degrees. So that's the end of the commercial. So there you have it. It's a brief history of Creo, where we've come from, what got us to where we are, and a bit about where we're going. For me, Creo represents a really good model of a workplace that encourages me to do good work and challenges me to work up to my potential instead of just doing 80%. And as a media developer, what really gets me going is to see technology presented in attractive or even beautiful ways to end users that help people get their work done faster to save people time. Now, when you save people time, you're saving them something that's absolutely unique. When we introduced Printergy, which is our pre-press workflow management software, the greatest testimonial I heard was that an entire team of people could get the same amount of work done that they had done before, but now they were able to leave at 5 o'clock when overtime had become a standard part of their working life. Now, while overtime did bring a few more dollars at the end of the day, that day ended without dinner at home or not being able to tuck the kids in at night. So as the saying goes, no one on their deathbed ever said that they wished they had stayed at work more. A great gift that we can all give our customers is a few more minutes of time in their lives, which, especially on Valentine's Day, I recommend you use to go tell someone who loves you that you appreciate them. Thanks. So I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. I'm happy to take those.
Given the organization of the information on computers, is a criterion for people who work at Creo the condition of the desk, how well it's organized?
Desk or just?
Their desk, their literal desktop.
So I don't quite understand the question.
Well, I just thought that given that this organization seems to be a passion, is it important for people at Creo to have neat desks?
So the question is it important, is there a corporate value on having your desk neat? Absolutely not. There's two kinds of people, and it's interesting. Like I'm a disorderly person, but I'm not disorganized. And there are people who are organized, and they're the project managers, and we all need them to keep us on track to make sure things actually ship on time. But they're actually a small fraction of the general population. Most of us are in the disorderly. But very interestingly, there's a study that we have referenced on the website about disorderly versus disorganized in terms of information retrieval, because the people who are very organized will claim that because they have everything organized, they can find anything exactly when they want. but us disorderly people believe the same thing. And in fact, somebody got a master's thesis out of doing a study on this and found exactly that it's true, that just because I have things scattered around on my desk, excuse me, does not mean that I can't find it just as fast as the organized person. It's just a different way of storing things. So there's certainly value in being able to retrieve things, but your particular way of storing it and retrieving it is up to us, and thankfully that's not imposed. Other questions? Oh, it was just a sneeze. The sneeze doesn't cover the question. Rob?
What, I know you're in a number of different countries, but what's your primary focus here? Is it production, manufacturing, marketing in British Columbia?
The question is how's the company split in terms of production, manufacturing, design? Well, there's pre-merger and there's post-merger. We went through a merger with Scitex almost 2 years ago. At the time, when Creo was founded just in Burnaby, we have, actually now we have 4 buildings. We have 3 in Discovery Park, the old McBlow building, that has our production facility for our thermal imaging, as well as accounting in there. We have the original Gilmore building, which was the Discovery Park incubator building, and that's kind of the corporate, that's where our call center is, and our demo center. And we have a new building we call Willingdon, which was the old Dogwood Lounge, or Dogwood House, that is now our software development group. We also have 2 buildings on Anasis, which are manufacturing. And so the larger format computer-to-plate devices are manufactured there. Since the merger with Israel, there's certain tax advantages to doing some of the manufacturing in Israel. So the smaller computer-to-plate devices are manufactured there. It's also cheaper to ship to Europe from Israel.
So what percentage of your 4,000 workforce would be in British Columbia?
I'd say it's almost half and half. It's about 1,000 in Burnaby? Okay, thanks. That's Rochelle. She's our corporate PR person. She knows all these numbers. The R&D is now kind of split between here and in Israel. And the rest of that, the main centers are in Herzliya and in Israel. And then the other buildings are sales and service places in Japan, the U.S., several in the U.S. and in Europe.
You said the old media sector isn't growing as fast as you would like it to. So you're looking at new ways to innovate, and I guess software and 6 degrees is your newest area. What other streams are you looking at for innovation right now?
So the question is, what other streams of innovation is Creo looking at to fuel the growth? First of all, in terms of old media, it's not actually, it's certainly not shrinking. It is growing. It grows at the economy, and we've been growing faster than the print sector has been able to grow by replacing the older workflow products with newer digital technology, so that even if the print sector hasn't been growing as much as we would like, Creo's growth has been able to do that by kind of changing the industry from within. We've also seen that in spite of the growth of the web, the fear that print is dead has definitely not happened. In fact, there are more titles being printed today than there were before the web, and obviously that's beneficial to us. And I think it's more than just a generational thing. I still prefer to look at beautiful magazines than read all my content on the web. And it seems that although the next generation still is more amenable to reading content on the screen, there still seems to be quite a growth in good quality print. So the areas that we're doing our innovation in are taking the idea. Diversifying is always risky when you're a public company, because stockholders want you to stay with your strengths and take only calculated risks. So the way we do that is either by bringing technologies that we understand to new markets, or well, that's the one that I'm most comfortable in. So 6 Degrees is a software-only product. So unlike a system sale we've been doing before, we're going to the desktop. So instead of, we have about 10,000 systems installed worldwide. So to get to 100,000 or 1 million, you go software only. And 6 Degrees takes a lot of the workflow expertise we used and brings that onto the desktop. Another kind of analogy on the hardware side is we're taking our expertise in optical imaging and working on a product called the Optical Cross Connect. This is a big problem in telecom, that now that a lot of data is going optical, it's very hard to switch optically because you have to convert back to electronics and then back up to optical. So the holy grail of telecom has been an optical switch, which you can actually switch light instead of turning it into electronics. So the current technologies around that are using microchips and something called memory or mirror arrays, which are thousands of little mirrors that you can point in different directions. So the analogy I heard most recently is if you want to water your garden and you want to spray in different areas, you don't put a deflector up and point it around. You just point the hose to where it is. So we've been working on technology for optical cross-connect that actually moves the fiber elements to point to each other. And that looks like it's a much less expensive and much more reliable way than using these microchips. So that's one area we're diversifying. Again, taking those core technologies of either software expertise or optical processing and moving into new markets.
I've heard about the hiring process at Creo. Could you explain it a bit and what the rationale behind it is? Particularly from an interviewing standpoint.
Sure. The question is about the hiring process, which I refer to as onerous. The culture at Creo relies on people being autonomous, independent thinkers, and team players. And the cost of a mistake in hiring is very, very high, because if you have somebody who isn't in simpatico with the ideals of the company, somebody who is political, somebody who wants to make themselves look good at somebody else's expense, it's very, very disruptive. So the interview process is arduous for those reasons, because it's really expensive both for the company and the individual if you hire somebody on and then find out they don't work. Nobody wants to do that, neither the employee, neither group. So the first stage is that we rely much more on personal references than on professional resume. The second is there's an interview process that involves testing. That is, if you're a software developer, you actually have to write some software. The story I like about that is that somebody comes into the interviewer for circuses, and he says, "I'm applying for the juggler job." And he says, "Okay, well, let me see here. And your resume looks fine. Can you juggle 2 balls? Yeah. Can you juggle 3? Yeah. Can you juggle 5? 7? No, you don't do 7? Okay. All right, well, you're hired." And the guy says, "Don't you want to see me juggle?" And that's exactly what we find, is that testing is something that it's a measure of whether you can do what you say you do. As we found, lots of people are really good at being able to promote ourselves, but in the end, you have to be able to do the job. So personal references, testing. There's at least 4 or 5 people who would interview someone coming into Creo, because we need to separate the. You all have interviewers that you make a personal connection with. I really like that person, so we want to remove that from the equation, because they have to work with many people. So we'll interview with several people and then have a consensus decision as to whether that person joins the team. So that's why it's kind of onerous. Any other questions? So the question is what happened with the merger with Scitex? What happened to all these principles at the time? Needless to say, it's difficult to merge companies, especially Creo being very principle-centered. There's not much room for compromise in those. And so I think the struggle for the last couple of years has really been to educate the people at Scitex what those principles are and encourage them to move from a hierarchical decision-making process to one where they have more autonomy. It turns out to be actually a really scary thing to do, because if you've worked, and we've all worked in places where you have to get approval to do everything. So on one side we complain about that. You say, "Oh, I can't do anything without my boss's approval." But the flip side of it is that you don't have to own a lot of the decision-making that you make. You say, we need to do this, we need to do this. As long as you can convince somebody else, they're the ones who write the check. So it's been a big education about learning to overcome, that taking on responsibility is both a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. And some people simply didn't make the transition, and they've gone on to other opportunities. And some people have said, no, I really would rather work in that kind of environment, and they're kind of coming up to speed, and it's definitely converging. I think the principles are by and large being maintained, partially because they work, and because you can't really take one out from the others. If you lose peer review, you lose a lot of ability to make sure that people are making good individual decisions. And if you lose economic thinking, then you have no way other than opinions or hierarchy to decide who's right about an argument. So I think those principles have survived. They took a setback where we did a lot of reshuffling, but that's, I think, a mark of why we have returned to the Creo name. After the merger, we picked Creo and CreoScitex as the company name. We rebranded ourselves. And now after 2 years, I think we've really seen that this is going to work as being a Creo principal company, and that's why we changed the name back. Thanks. Okay, I know time's getting short. Can we take one more?
Just one quick question. Peers, are they done on an anonymous basis, or are you interviewed by your peers, or do they fill out a certain evaluation form, or how is that done?
So the question is about how does peer review process work? It's, I'll give you the 3-minute version because it takes a long time. Peer reviews are anonymous, so each person has a section head who's kind of their advocate, who's not necessarily their line manager, but is kind of their advocate for the process, make sure everything's working along. So everybody who they work with, and they can nominate people who they want to be in there, and also their other people. You can review anybody else in the company you've worked with. So I've sent a review into the CEO when I thought he was doing something particularly needing correction. So the peer reviews are anonymous. They have to do with strengths and weaknesses of the person, their contribution to the bottom line. Those are gathered together, and they're merged and presented to the employee in a review process, and so they get that direct feedback.
Is that done regularly, like
Once a year. Yeah, it's quite expensive in terms of time, because the other part of it is that not only do you do peer review, you also use this for, not for salary discussion, but for bonus for the stock options. So you have to merge them together, and you end up ranking. In the early days, we would have, in a 100-person company, you have 100 people ranked. Usually the CEO is at the top because it's a meritocracy. He's actually the best guy to be the CEO. And you rank everybody in the company in terms of contribution that year, and give you up stock options that way. Okay, well, thanks. I'm just losing my voice. So probably a good time to lose it.